They say every tragedy begins with someone laughing. That's how I open my statement. The detective gives me a look that lives somewhere between pity and paperwork. The room smells of burnt coffee, old carpet, and that faint metallic aftertaste you get when blood tries to pass as disinfectant. Amber light hums through the blinds. Dust hangs in the air like applause that forgot to stop. "Relax," he says. "You're not the one on trial." I give him a short customer service chuckle. You'd be surprised how often I hear that. He presses record. The red light blinks, a tiny accusation. Before the clubs and the crowds, there was a house where we never cried. Mom said tears made ghosts jealous. So we laughed, at funerals, at breakups, at bills we couldn't pay. I was 5 when my father slipped on black ice. Mom stood over him and laughed so hard her voice cracked like the pavement under his head. That sound stitched something in me, a thread that never stopped vibrating. I learned early that laughter is cheaper than grief. It started, I tell him, with a chuckle. The club was called the Giggle Chamber. Bad omen, but a decent bar. Neon sputtered outside, casting red and blue across faces that wanted to forget their day jobs. Inside, the walls were painted black, but you could still see the water stains underneath, like old bruises showing through makeup. The mic smelt of nerves and mint gum. That first night, someone cracked a joke about penguins or politicians, the usual sort. The crowd laughed in unison, people-pleaser kind of laughter that says, "We're fine, honestly." Watched from the bar, nursing a warm beer. When the comedian left the stage, the applause died. But the laughter didn't. It stayed in the room like smoke after a fire. Soft at first, barely there. The bartender wiped down glasses and hummed along to it, thought it was the speakers. The manager checked the sound system twice. But I heard it clearly underneath everything, a chuckle that didn't belong to anyone. I walked to the stage. Empty now, just the microphone stand and a stool with a wobbly leg. The laughter seemed to come from the floorboards or maybe the walls. I touched the mic. It was warm. Behind the bar hung a yellowing poster from an old comedy tour. In small print, "Fear and far share a punchline." I used to think it was clever marketing. Now I think it was a warning. The detective tilts his pen. "You're saying laughter spread?" "I'm saying it evolved." A week later, I was back on stage, different crowd, same hunger for distraction. I told a story about my mother, about black ice and cracked voices. They laughed nervously at first, unsure if it was allowed. Then harder and then too hard. A woman in the 3rd row couldn't stop. Her friends patted her back, handed her water. She doubled over, gasping between convulsions. The laughter twisted into something else, something wet. She slid off her chair. Security carried her out still giggling, tears streaming down her face. The rest of the audience watched, frozen. Then someone in the back started laughing. Then another. Within seconds, the whole room was howling, not at my joke but at her. I stood on stage and felt it, that hum beneath the sound. The nervous laugh. It smelt of static and perfume testers, panic dressed in polite clothes. A man keeled over mid-chuckle at the 6 o'clock news 2 days later. His chest still jolted when the paramedics zipped the bag. I smiled along when I saw it online. You have to. Silence gets you noticed. Didn't that strike you as odd? The detective asks. Everything's normal if it's popular. Then came the contagious laugh. It traveled quicker than rumor. People caught it on buses, in lifts, during moments of silence. So seemly, a stranger's grin could expand your lungs. The media, unusually in agreement, called it the joy plague. Couples who hadn't spoken in months started wheezing together. Some posted pics in panic, hashtag for better for worse, then waited for likes that never came, while the chuckles kept going. Teachers collapsed mid-lesson. Students smirked in the surprising silence. A funeral went viral when the priest slipped on wet grass. The mourners clapped for 5 straight minutes. The mayor live-streamed herself laughing for 6. When she finally gasped, "Please stop recording," no one did. The detective folds his arms. "And you? Did you catch it?" "I was born with it." He frowns. "What kind?" "The quiet one. The sort that looks like control. The one grief wears to work." He hesitates. The tape hums. I call it the silent laugh. It sounds like relief, feels like drowning. It's what happens when a scream learns manners. I lean back in my chair. For the first time since we started, my hands are shaking. I press them flat against the table, but they won't stop. There's a moment right after the laughter dies when your body forgets who it belongs to. Your lungs still remember the rhythm. Your heart doesn't. That's where I live in that pause. The detective watches my hands. I pull them back into my lap. He says nothing. Good, silence is the only honest audience. He slides photographs across the table. Mouths open mid-laugh, eyes all wrong. Recognize anyone? I point. That's the chuckle. Blue jacket. That's the nervous one, see her hands? And then, that's the contagious one. Center frame. We ran facial recognition, he says. There's only one person in every photo. I smile, but it takes effort this time. You don't say. You were on stage. I was. So were they. He closes the folder. 48 dead. 48 set free. That's not funny. Neither was their laughter. A twitch flickers at his mouth. A single chuckle escapes. The mirror breathes back the sound, stretching it. He touches his throat, a touch too late. You shouldn't laugh in small rooms, I whisper. They say the tape corrupted there. The laughter distorted into something liquid, and underneath was a whisper. Help me. The report calls it mass psychogenic illness. TikTok calls me the laughing man of Block M. I call it feedback. The viral kind. They moved me to isolation, where guards wear headphones that play rain. Doctors hum children's songs as they walk the corridor, and yet, still, their shoulders shake. They always pretend it's a cough. You want truth? They were all mine. Every single one. The chuckle opened the door. The nervous filled the cracks. The contagious made sure everyone heard. The silent waited underneath them all. It wasn't joy. It was need, a plea for someone to listen to grief without remixing it as comedy. Behind my eyes, scenes replay in wandering visions, moonlit confession rooms, shifting walls, shows that never end but change sets each episode. You'd like them, detective. They're darkly funny. They send a new interrogator, young, fresh, the sort who still believes empathy is sterile. He brings tea he won't drink. Do you feel remorse? Of course. Every time someone laughs, I hear it. He stops the recorder. Then what do you want? I lean close enough for my breath to fog the glass. To hear silence again. He half laughs, a reflex, a habit, then catches himself and leaves. The light flickers amber, then white, while dust floats like ghosts taking their unwelcome bows. I open my mouth, but no sound comes. Some laughs are better left unheard. The footage ends there. The side laugh. They built a storage loft above the interview room years later. Boxes of unsolved cases stacked beneath the same flickering light. Sometimes the guards swear they hear laughter from up there, soft, almost polite, like someone trying not to interrupt. They checked once, found nothing but dust and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Still, no one stores anything there now. They call it the loft room. Not a laughing matter, really. Unless you know the joke. Diego pulled up to the old building in his Jeep, shutting the engine off and sighing, rubbing his eyes briefly. Another day in paradise with 5 boat tours, plus cleaning up for the inspection later that week. He locked his vehicle and wandered to the entrance of the building. Taking his time, he surveyed the crowd of people waiting for him, sighing before pasting a customer service smile on his face and quickening his stride. Good morning, folks. We'll get started in just a few minutes. He called out as he jogged into the building. Diego pulled the keys to the boat off the hook and went out the back door to the dock. A trail of people were following him as soon as he opened the back gate, and he suppressed an eye roll when he saw some of his regulars. Yes, Diego had regulars. The same few people would come back week after week to go on one of the tours and hear his stories. He would have thought that once would be enough, but clearly he was wrong. He motioned for the crowd to come forward, staring out into the murky waters as they got settled on the covered boat. A movement towards his left caught his eye. Turning his head to look, he didn't see anything beyond a few ripples in the water. One of his regulars, Clark, tapped him on the shoulder, clearly impatient to get going. Suppressing an eye roll, Diego turned and clapped his hands once. All right, let's get going. I'm Diego Ramirez, and I'll be your tour guide today. I see some familiar faces here, so y'all will have to bear with me as I go over a few things, he said, raising his voice to be heard over the murmurs in the group. He went over the rules of the tour. Keep all limbs inside the boat at all times and no standing up while the boat is in motion. I don't want to have to fish anyone out of the swamp today, he finished, a few people giggling at the thought of it. Finally, he sat down and turned the boat on. It roared to life almost instantly. Again, something caught his eye, this time in front of him, but he couldn't see anything out of the ordinary as he scrutinized the water. Shrugging and looking back towards the crowd, he pulled the boat away from the dock, starting up his spiel about the wildlife in the swamp. He came to a stop about 15 minutes later, turning and watching the group of small children as they watched the alligators swimming in the water. Diego smiled lightly as he watched them squeal in delight as their parents took photos, trying to get both their children and the animals in the same shot. This was the part of the job that he loved, watching the kids be absolutely enthralled by wild animals. Finally, he was able to move on deeper into the swamp, where he started up on the different myths. This was the highlight of the trip for a lot of people, as he always had different stories to tell. This time, he told the story of Two-Toed Tom, the giant alligator who had gotten his foot stuck in a trap, cutting off 3 toes as he escaped. Then, he told the same story he always told of the Lady of the Swamp. Day after day, he told the story of how she was murdered, her body dumped in the swamp to be forgotten. Now, this next one some of you may have heard already, so keep the heckling to a minimum, Diego said, turning the boat off and swiveling around in his seat to face the group. The boat drifted in the murky waters as the slow, gentle current moved them. He started the story, and some of the regulars groaned, but he waved a hand at them. His eyes were on the kids that were watching him, attention completely caught by how he weaved the tale. Her boyfriend reported her missing the day after she was murdered. Of course, they didn't know that yet. Authorities finally found a shoe and some DNA evidence that suggested she had been dumped out here and left for the animals to eat. They dragged the swamp for days, but never found a body. No one was ever charged for it either. No body, no crime, right? He chuckled, looking out over the water. People swear that they can see her spirit out in the swamp right about this time of day, and sometimes at night too. That when the light catches just right, they see the spirit of a beautiful woman drifting over the murky waters. He paused for a moment before shrugging and clapping his hands, startling several of the people aboard the boat. So I've heard anyway, I've never seen her myself, so who's to say? Diego watched as several people shuddered at the story, even some of the ones who had heard it before. He continued on, waxing more poetic nonsense he didn't believe about the swamp as he continued to drive the boat through it. He was good at his job. By the time the tour was almost over, he had all of his guests listening to him with rapt attention. Stopping for some final photos of the wildlife, he looked out over the water, watching as the sun slowly rose higher in the sky. Wiping his brow, he sighed at the thought of being out on the water in the heat and humidity the rest of the day. Then, he heard a splash close to the side of the boat. He ignored it, assuming it was some fish or a log. Then, something hit the boat just enough that it started to rock in the gentle water. Diego turned in his seat, looking over the edge of the boat. He reached back and grabbed an oar from behind his chair, lowering it into the water, searching for what could have hit them. As he leaned down, peering into the water, he thought he caught a glimpse of something. At first, his brain dismissed it as an alligator. Then, he caught another glimpse. It had an almost human shape to it. Diego's eyes widened, yanking the oar back into the boat and standing up. Detective Matthew Gray had seen death before: cold bodies, lifeless stares, blood pooling against concrete. But this was something else. The underground corridors stretched before him like the guts of a forgotten beast, pulsing with damp air and the distant sound of something shifting in the dark. He pressed forward, his flashlight casting jagged shadows against the moss-covered walls. Every breath tasted like mold and rust, every step echoing too loudly in the suffocating silence. Somewhere behind him, the exit had sealed shut. He should have known this wasn't a simple crime scene. The architect had left his mark again, carved symbols on the floor, a corpse posed unnaturally, and a cryptic message left in a dead man's mouth. The key unlocks more than a door. Every lock has its maker. And now, Matthew was inside the architect's creation. The first hour was a test of endurance. The corridors twisted unpredictably, branching into dead ends and looping back in impossible ways. The deeper he went, the more the walls seemed to shift, closing in, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. The air vibrated with something just beyond the edge of hearing, a whisper, a breath, a name spoken in a voice he almost recognized. He wasn't alone. Matthew's pulse hammered as he aimed his flashlight into the darkness. It barely cut through the thick air, illuminating only fragments, rotting beams, rusted pipes, what looked like claw marks etched into the stone. Then the whispers became voices. "You left me." He spun around, gun raised, but there was nothing. Just the empty corridor stretching back into the void. His grip tightened. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He knew that voice. He had heard it before, in his nightmares. James. His partner, his friend. The man who had bled out in an alleyway 9 years ago. The man Matthew had failed to save. The air grew colder. The shadows thickened. The corridor ahead was different now, a single rusted door standing ajar, the faint glow of candlelight flickering from within. The whispers beckoned. "Come inside." The room was a shrine to horror. Newspapers covered the walls, their ink-smudged headlines recounting crimes too familiar to be coincidence. A single chair sat in the center, drenched in dried blood, shackles dangling from the arms. On the table beside it, a rusted scalpel gleamed under the candlelight. And on the far wall, carved deep into the stone, were the words, "Get horror stories as stories in your inbox. Join Medium for free to get updates from this writer. Remember me for faster sign-in. I know what you did." Matthew's breath hitched. His mind raced. This wasn't just a game. This was personal. The architect wasn't testing him. He was punishing him. The candlelight flickered. A shadow moved. Then the door slammed shut. He turned, gun raised, his flashlight beam trembling as it caught the figure standing in the corner. A silhouette, tall, unmoving, hollow-eyed. The face was familiar, painfully familiar. James. But it wasn't James. The thing wearing his face tilted its head, lips curling into something almost human. "You let me die," it whispered. Matthew took a step back. His fingers tightened on the trigger. "You let all of us die." Then the lights went out, and the screaming began. When they found him hours later, Matthew was alone. His flashlight lay in pieces. His hands trembled. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. And on the walls, carved into the stone with something sharper than any blade, were the words, "See you soon."